Hi, Table Rock. This week, as we meet in life groups to talk about how to live out the call to be good and wise counselors, I want to point our attention to some of the things I mentioned on Sunday. We talked about Job's suffering, and we looked at good and bad counsel that his friends displayed. And we began by talking about the significance of silence, and then we also talked about the wisdom in watching our words. We began with the significance of silence because Job's friends begin well. Instead of coming to Job and offering explanation and trying to explain that everything will be okay, they don't start there. Rather, they enter in silence. And they enter into his suffering by tearing their robes, putting dust and ashes on themselves, sitting on the ground and entering into his suffering with 7 days of silence. And I pointed our attention to the fact that as we try to bear other people's burdens, that Scripture calls us to enter into the suffering, to bear burdens, not to explain burdens. And that when we saw Job's friends in the beginning just silently entering into his grief, that is what Scripture is calling us to do, to enter into the suffering and to begin there. And I said that our silence, it's a blood-bought silence. Anyone could say when people are suffering that we should not say many things. But as Christians, we have the unique privilege of having a blood-bought silence. And what I meant by that is that Christ has purchased the fact that God is the great comforter. So we don't need to be. We don't need to speak because God has spoken. And instead, we can enter in and share the suffering and begin with silence and not need to feel like we need to explain or that even we need to be the ultimate comforters. Rather, God is the ultimate comforter. But at some point, our silence does come to an end and we speak. And so we looked in the second half of the sermon at the wisdom in watching our words. And we looked at it by seeing the negative example of Job's friends and how they spoke, but they went beyond God's words. And what got them in trouble was that they tried to explain why things were happening. They went beyond God's wisdom. And they said that Job was suffering because he did something wrong. This was punishment. So though they had right theology, that God is in control, that God is fair and just, they misunderstood what was happening with Job and his suffering, because they falsely assumed that God always punishes wickedness and always rewards righteousness here on earth today. But that's often not the case. And in fact, Job was suffering not because he did something wrong. And so Job's friends get in trouble. They fail to watch their words. They go beyond God's words and speak beyond God's authority. And so the call was to stick with God's words, to stick with what we know about God. God is a comforter. God is sovereign. God is near the brokenhearted. And don't veer off and try to explain and try to offer reasons and explanations and comforts that we can't offer. So this week, as we apply this to our lives, I hope that we can leave as better counselors of those who are suffering. And we can do so because of what Christ has done, and because God is our hope and God is our comfort. I hope you have a very fruitful conversation this week, Table Rock, in your life groups. Thank you.